Hello, protocols, packets, and programs. Welcome to Scary October. We could tell stories of skeleton frameworks, hordes of zombie-like CVEs, and flaws buried deep within repos, but nothing is so ominous as three simple words. Top 10 list. Which means this week we talk with Steve Wilson about the OWASP GenAI project and why it's so much more than a large list model. Start counting and stay tuned for Application Security Weekly.
This is a Security Weekly production for security professionals by security professionals. Please visit securityweekly.com/subscribe to subscribe to all the shows on our network.
It's the show to learn the latest tools and techniques to understand DevOps, applications, and the cloud. Your trusted source for the latest Appsec news. It's time for Application Security Weekly. Generative AI is powerful, but it comes with real risks, from prompt injection to data leakage misuse and agentic AI. The OWASP GenAI Security Project unites a global community of expert practitioners who tackle these challenges every day. Together, they've built practical playbooks, adoption guides, and the OWASP Top 10 for LLMs, resources any team can apply right now to strengthen AI security. And it doesn't stop there. This is open source, built by practitioners, for practitioners, working together to secure generative AI. Visit securityweekly.com/OWASP to use the playbooks and join the effort to protect tomorrow's intelligence today. Tired of the endless cycle of cloud vulnerabilities? Avoid over 95% of CVEs with minimal container images from Minimus. No bloated base layers, no unnecessary packages, just what your app needs to run. Drop Minimus images into existing deployments to dramatically reduce your attack surface and remediation work. Maximum security, minimum effort. That's Minimus. Visit securityweekly.com/Minimus to learn more. This is episode 352, recorded October 13th, 2025. I'm your host, Mike Shima, and I'm here with John Kinsella. Hello, John.
We've got October 13th, but it's not Friday the 13th.
Not Friday. That's what we're cursed by recording on Mondays. So yeah, I know. Well, Monday the 13th never quite got the franchise. But speaking of other scary camps you could go to, you could head to Disney's Coronado Springs Resort and holiday camp, sleepaway camp for the InfoSec World 2025. It's this October 27th to 29th. Coincidentally, just before Halloween, perfect setup for a slasher. There will be tons of cybersecurity pros, who knows what kind of security it is, workshops before and after, and endless networking. Starting to sound like a Hellraiser franchise now. You can save 25% with code ISW25-SW at securityweekly.com/ISW 2025. Steve Wilson is Chief Product Officer at Exabeam. He's a leader in generative AI and cybersecurity. He's the author of The Developer's Playbook for Large Language Model Security. Plus, he founded and leads the OWASP GenAI project. Hello, Steve. Thanks for joining.
Hey, guys. Thanks for having me.
And we're having you here to hopefully talk about the OWASP GenAI, because that's what all the introduction was about. And one of the things that OWASP has done is turned a small project, a small top 10 list from 2 years ago, into something that's a little bit bigger. Can you set the stage for us and just give us a sense of what the last 2 years of OWASP GenAI project has looked like?
Yeah. So, I think it was spring of 2023, a few months after ChatGPT had come out. I was doing some research on the cybersecurity implications of these strange new creatures, these chatbots and language models that were cropping up. And I was wondering if we could write a top 10 list about this. And I talked to my friend Jeff Williams, who I'm sure you guys have had on more than once on this show. And Jeff said, you should do it. Go talk to the OWASP board, get yourself a project. And so I announced it on my personal LinkedIn. I said, we're going to make a top 10 list for this. And I hoped I could find 12 other people in the universe who are interested in this obscure intersection of things.
Just a few.
200 plus people showed up on the first Zoom meeting for the project. And we had maybe 400 people who contributed to the first version. I thought, wow, well, that was hugely successful, and it just kept ballooning from there after we released it. More interest in everything that we released, and then, OWASP top 10 lists are for AppSec people and maybe software developers. But I had CISOs coming to me saying, hey, I read this and it really helped me get this straight in my head, but do you have anything for CISOs? And so we created a checklist for CISOs. And then people are like, how do I red team these things? So we created red teaming guides. And now people are asking, I'm building agents. What do I do differently? So we keep building more and more stuff. And the project has continued to grow. We now have just shy of 20,000 people in the LinkedIn group for just the GenAI project. And what started out as this LLM top 10 list has turned into the OWASP GenAI Security Project, which is the fastest project in OWASP history ever to go from incubator to flagship status.
Yeah, and clearly just the community involvement alone is clearly a sign that people are interested, concerned, need this. Everything is so new that creating that LLM top 10 list needed to come from somewhere. But one of the things I was also going to do is, before we get off the top 10 list side of things, because there are a bunch of sub projects, so the GenAI is much bigger than the list. But looking at the original list, it was maybe half of it was, let me just say, old school types of security problems, things that are familiar to already maybe even those 200 people who first showed up, with some additional, new LLM related things like model poisoning, prompt injection. But with that preamble set up, we have also had the original OWASP top 10 list around for 20 years, and a lot of those problems haven't been solved. So going into this, great to have a seed for a top 10 list, but what was on your mind to try to figure out, how do we make a top 10 list that works, that makes a change so we see more secure software, more secure use of GenAI and LLMs?
So a couple things. I think when we set out to make the LLM top 10 list, we were obviously very cognizant of the fact that there wasn't just the original web list. There were all sorts of top 10 lists, and it's the strength and the curse of OWASP that, it's an open source project and people build different things. But we didn't want any of it to be a clone of the core top 10. But AppSec's AppSec. So sometimes things aren't the same, but they do rhyme. And when we look at things like prompt injection, you can go, well, that was in the list. Well, no, it wasn't. There was injection is a common concept in AppSec, but prompt injection is a very different beast. And like I like to tell people, I think the more that we've looked at prompt injection, I kind of hoped 2.5 years into this, that would be solved, but it's not even a little bit. But that's because it's more like phishing than it is like SQL injection. And that's the problem with a lot of this AI security stuff, is it's more like securing humans than securing programs. And that makes it really mushy and weird.
I'm sure we're going to come back to mushy and weird as our metaphor here. But I think part of that is also kind of alluding to, said the OWASP top 10 list. Maybe for AppSec, I would strongly agree. It's definitely for AppSec. It's hopefully for developers, but it needs to be presented to developers in a consumable way. But if we just talk about the GenAI project, you also mentioned CISOs and others. Here, I'm going to have to use my business speak, other personas. But that's the fancy way of saying just there are different audiences, right, that are consuming or being impacted by GenAI or trying to use GenAI securely. How has that influenced what the project looks like? And maybe you could talk us a little through about some of what these sub-projects evolved into.
Yeah. I think the thing that surprised us early was the fact that we had CISOs, not just management, not the AppSec manager, but the actual CISO reading these things. I think they're paid to look forward a little bit. They're executives, they're business leaders. They could see something coming, but they actually had no understanding of what was coming. So they were desperate for something that would help give them a framework. So they were very grateful the top 10 list was there and was digestible. And I think it's one of the nice things about top 10 lists is if you keep it dense, you keep it to 25 pages, people could read it, digest it, and get a framework for how to deal with these things. But Sandy Dunn jumped into the project, and she's a CISO, and she said, I'm gonna make something that CISOs would understand." And that was the first time we realized we could broaden the lens. Since that, we've had people step up who wanted to lead various different angles into it. We've had one group that said they wanted to research how adversaries are using Gen AI, very different lens through it. And something that I think in cybersecurity broadly, we're all cognizant of is that all of the hackers are now AI supercharged cyborgs, which was not true 2 years ago and is true now and getting worse every month. So how do we understand what they can and can't do with AI, and how good are they getting, and what do I need to worry about? So we started up a project on that. They put out a document on how do you prepare your organization for things like deep fakes. CISOs are always panicked about phishing. Phishing's gotten exponentially worse in the last 18 months. Used to be you were getting poorly spelled emails from Nigerian princes, and now you're getting real-time video, audio, deep fakes of your CEO asking you to, please reset your password.
And here's why I want to jump in for a second, because part of the conversation is also to talk about, how is Gen AI changing security, improving security? And even with phishing, if we're just predicated on our defenses need to be inspect this, per RFC, or I can't remember, 3986, make sure this URL is validated and, check for spelling errors. That seems like the weak, mushy way of trying to enforce security, where we've talked about, we as the industry have said, if it's phishing that's credential harvesting, why don't we have FIDO keys, pass keys, hardware-backed keys that can't be intercepted, can't be replayed? And that feels like a much stronger countermeasure with the parallel like cross-site scripting, SQL injection in particular, having things like prepared statements, which we don't have for prompt injection. But that's where I'd love to tease out, superficially, it feels like these are challenges, but if we dig into them, we do have solutions for some types of phishing, at least. It feels like more of just adoption and rollout is harder rather than missing a technical solution. Does that resonate on the Gen AI side as well? Or are we still in the figuring out what those solutions could even be?
So I think one of the things that we're realizing is that take the easy route when you can, which means take that hard technological solution. Because the hard thing is trying to solve this the sort of pure software way, with the appsec attitude of I can apply a patch that will fix it. Because I was at an event, it was called the AI Agent Security Summit in San Francisco last week. It was a really good event. And I think the thing that was becoming part of the theme is prompt injection, hallucinations. These are not solved and will not be solved anytime soon. And there's a whole industry of people trying to solve prompt injection, but they're creating new AIs to try and protect your AIs. And this is a super common pattern. And it's very useful and it's good defense in depth. But I often tell people, look, dude, it's turtles all the way down. It's not, if you have a thing that's provably not solvable, and then I try to solve it the way that it's provably not solvable, you by, extension have not solved it. So a lot of what we are looking at, which is, if I assume I can be prompt injected, just the same way I assume I can be phished, I need to look at durable defenses. And so part of these things are, don't just rely on defeating prompt injection. Build your system assuming you will be prompt injected. And use patterns that are things like, don't Don't give your LLM access to data that the user wouldn't have access to some other way. You can use it to reprocess it for them, make it more accessible to them, make them able to view it more easily in different ways, and that can be super useful. But simply don't give it information that it could leak that would be damaging, because if you do, you will lose. We've gone from 90% reliable defenses, which is terrible, right? We wouldn't accept that in any other part of security, to 95 to 99. That's still terrible. So at least if it is, you're handling highly confidential information. So you just need to change your approach.
Well, and part of that approach is, I think, an aspect of just how mature is your, call it, product security program, application security program, et cetera. And if so, how much of that is the audience where you've seen a divergence between, here's an org that has, the CEO has mandated thou shalt use AI because insert whatever, fill in the blanks, but they have already no AppSec team, or it's a small startup, versus a company like a Google, a Meta, that has a massive application and product security team, and they're trying to put it in everywhere, but they have that maturity to be able to do what you were just saying. Here are some ostensibly controls that we think are in place to be around user data, tenant isolation, these types of things that we could rattle off. So the question since it was a long-winded question, to bring it back around, for those low maturity orgs coming in and just trying to adopt AI, how is where would you lead them to first, or what would you direct them to do first?
So, boy, that was a meaty question. I could spend the next 45 minutes just trying to answer 3 different sub-questions that I pulled out of that. But let's try the where to start thing. And if you're a small organization and you're coming to this, then in the modern world, we have companies that are doing $100 million in business with 12 employees. Things like Cursor, for example. These AI native companies are small. They don't have 12-person AppSec teams. They're 12-person companies. So the first thing you need to do, if you're going to be this more AI native startup that really depends on AI, is everybody better understand how it works. And I think we've been in a position with traditional AppSec where we can pretend that you can have an AppSec team that is the only one who knows how security needs to work for software. And that we've tried to push that on developers. That's been mostly a failure. We tried to shift left by giving developers tools to help with AppSec. I'll just go in and say that was a failure. I don't even work in AppSec anymore. It's just a disastrous failure. I think education helps a lot. And I think in these cases, it really does. But just to put a point on it, I think when you look at roles, the person that I want to understand AI security is the product manager, because the failures tend to start there. And I look at the OWASP top 10 for LLMs that we built. One of the most controversial entries was one that we called excessive agency. And when people read it, sometimes they'll come back and they'll go, this is just least privilege. This is degenerate. This is already covered. And I'm like, no, it's not, because least privilege means give the software the least privileges it should have to do the prescribed task. That's different from don't ask the software to do things that it can't do securely. And the example I use in my book is HAL from 2001. That was a product management decision that said, I'm going to have the AI have unfettered, no human in the loop access to every system on the spacecraft that results in his ability to turn off the life support systems. That was not an AppSec failure. That was a product management failure. And so by getting everyone to the point where they understand what are safe things that AI agents can do and what are not safe things that they can do, then you can have somebody who leans in harder on the technical aspects of how do I enforce these things? What are the controls that I can reasonably put in place? But I think you need to have broad understanding of that.
So that
go ahead.
Yeah, before we go off that, joking about, opening pod bay doors and, can Alexa just open your front door, which is the modern version there. what I hear you describing is more of fall in like a trust and safety category rather than a maybe call a traditional application security category, in the sense of it's like you said, what does the product do rather than just what are the mechanics of the code. Does this function work as written? And the reason I'm jumping on that is this even like an AppSec domain to be considered? Not that it should be dismissed, but maybe do we not have the AppSec in the future anyway? As AppSec had its time, we need to move on to something else.
So here's the interesting thing I've seen about AppSec, and it depends on the mindset of the AppSec person, because we have people who've defined their careers for the last decade or two around being an AppSec person. I think AppSec is evolving like crazy. I don't think in the future it will be called AppSec. I think we're less and less are we going to talk about things called apps at all in the future, right? But
I mean, it's still for agent. It's still OWASP Agent Security Project, so you don't have to change the name, right?
But what I found is interesting is broadly, you say trust and safety, but I'll say the thing is the merging of the concept of risk. And it's almost like this is not a GRC discussion, but everything is a risk discussion at this point. It's all about what risk am I willing to accept? And there's the GRC definition of risk, which, let's be honest, is often just box checking, which means the only people in the organization who really have a sophisticated understanding of software risk are the AppSec people. And what that means is that, and I talk to a lot of them, the place people wind up when they're looking inside their organization for somebody with a sophisticated view of software risks is the AppSec team. So they are getting asked for input into a much broader set of discussions than they previously had, because they're the only ones with relevant background and expertise. Even if they need to stretch a little bit and learn some new stuff about AI, what they understand is managing software risk. And that's its own very specific discipline that requires some scabs and some skinned knees. You can't just read a book on managing software risk and be an expert.
Well, and that's what's in. Oh, go ahead, John.
Why? I mean, I want to say why not to that question, but I think one of the interesting things to me about this, I want to go back and partially talk about, whether Cursor has, depending where you look, it's either 12 people or 30 people, and the parent company has 150. But either way, it's a small number of folks that are creating this pretty massive, well, I wouldn't call it massive, significant software product with the use of AI. And you were just talking about risk management, and that's something you have to learn, but why? And like application security is something that's really difficult. Again, why? So one of the questions which both I'm asking and like my leadership asks a lot recently is like, why can't we do this with AI? So is it really that difficult to train an AI around risk management? Or it feels like there's a really big gap here that, as you were saying a few minutes ago, Steve, it's growing where, people are able to generate, I won't say slop, let's say quality code relatively easily once you learn how to use these things. But the other side, I'll call it the defenders or not defenders, but the other side of that equation, it feels like they should be catching up just as much, but instead they're getting deeper in a hole. Why?
All right. Again, you guys ask such good questions. Any one of these questions could be a bunch of answers and a bunch of topics. But let me just really quick defend my point about AppSec is hard and you need skinned knees. Because so much of it is about messy meat space stuff that you can't get from a book. It's about how do I argue with a developer that they need to actually address this risk? How do I communicate with management about what these risks are and how do I deal with them? And that's different than reading a top 10 list or a book about AppSec or summarizing a sneak scan. It's just different.
To really counter that, we've got LLMs which are encouraging people to divorce their partner, or they're encouraging people that, they're living inside the matrix, or it's like, so it's obvious that, some of at least the big chat GPT type things are good at convincing people. So why can't we get them to convince people to do some of these other things you're talking about?
So I wanted to get that out of the way on why do I think the AppSec people bring something to the party that is
Yeah.
durable. Now,
They're not that
do
big a deal.
I think the AppSec people could use some better AI augmentation? Yes, I do. But let me give you a little bit of thought about this, because the thing that has raced ahead the last 12 months that I don't think some people anticipated is that all of the high-end R&D on LLMs has gone into code generation, not natural language generation.
Yeah.
They sort of knocked the ability to understand natural language 18 months ago. It understands what you're talking about. The question is, what can it do other than, regurgitate a 5-paragraph essay on what you're asking it for? And the thing that has been a huge unlock to productivity is write code. And so these LLMs, the way they are being trained now, is much different than what we heard about LLM training 2 years ago. The 2 years ago thing was I had it read the internet and I adjusted some model weights while it was reading the internet. And I have a next token predictor that will predict the likely next word based on a synthesis of the internet. The modern LLMs are trained nothing like that, and they operate nothing like that. They did read the internet to get a basic understanding of English language, but more and more that's a really curated version of the internet because the internet's full of crap. But when it comes to doing work like writing code, there are massive synthetic data sets that each of these labs have. Something like Anthropic is not training on what we think they're training on, right? We always used to say, oh, they're reading Stack Overflow. Why were these things horrible at generating code and generated insecure, terrible code and everything like that in the first few generations? Because they were reading Stack Overflow. They don't anymore. That's just off the table. They read GitHub to learn to use open source packages, not learn to write them. They have really curated stuff. So in short, all of the labs are training super high-end coders. They are not training super high-end AppSec bots. So what happens is you're able to take a high-end coder and you're able to give them a quick education on AppSec and say, apply what you know about coding and try to solve the AppSec problems. And that's where we are kind of with using the LLMs to do AppSec. There are companies out there that are investing in putting better and better layers around those that are different from saying, hey, ChatGPT, give me an AppSec scan on my app, right? Read my GitHub repo and give me a scan. They're getting better at that. But honestly, at the studies all say that these are not good at finding security problems. They will find them. They will sometimes find things that are novel that your sneak scan won't find. And that's cool. But they're just not really, really deeply trained for it. We have a bunch of work to do before we're ready to say that I have AIs that are ready to take on AppSec work.
Yeah, and here's what I want to bring in, because there's also this aspect of, are the LLMs any good at, how much better are they than grep? Because so much of SAS, so much of DAST is just a grep. A fancy grep, I'll acknowledge, don't send emails, but it's just searching for patterns. And the reason I'm bringing that up is that's like you're grepping for the old school vulns, the Stack Overflows, buffer overflows, the cross-site scripting, SQL injection that I mentioned. But there's also the aspect of application security that is more of architecture, or call it excessive agency, or how is this application architected so that it is resilient or defended against, it has a basically defensive, a resiliency against vulns. And the reason I'm going there is I would add to John's kind of question is, why aren't the coding LLMs generating that? And or why aren't AppSec talking to more developers who are experts on architecture, who could build architectures to be more resilient about that, rather than talking about small tactical things related to check the length, or is this signed versus unsigned? Because that feels
Yeah.
like just you rely on a compiler for that.
So step one, hey, SAST things are pretty good at finding vulnerabilities. They have been for a long time. The problem was getting anybody to fix the vulnerabilities, because two things. One, they find a ton of vulnerabilities that are real, but maybe accessible, maybe not, maybe exploitable, maybe not. And we spend more time arguing about it than it would take to fix it, but people don't want to get distracted. I mean, my old former contrast friends who are now running this company called Pixie. So Arshan, who I'm sure you've had on the show, he's just taken the attitude of saying, like, hey, the scanners will find all the vulnerabilities. Let's use the LLMs to just fix them all so I don't have to argue with the developers. I think that's a really novel approach, and I really wish him the best on that. I think that could be the actual answer to a lot of that routine cleanup, is just have the bots clean up all the SQL injection vulnerabilities when you stumble across them. Turn that into a prepared statement, fix the buffer overflow. And then I don't have to argue about it. The point about architecture, though, I think that has always been a thing where so many of these really durable, yucky vulnerabilities are architecture problems, not buffer overflow problems. Problem is, there are relatively few people who are really good at software architecture. And when you've built something, fixing the architecture may not be an option. That may be a 2-year project, right? So when you talk about, hey, could the AI help me with the architecture stuff? Here's the other thing to understand is this is the part the AIs are worst at right now. You ask the AIs, write me a new sorting algorithm, write me, these 2 pages of code, write me this small subsystem. They're getting better and better at this, but the context window that they're dealing with, even the ones that have relatively massive context versus what we had a year ago, they have context for a few hundred pages of text. That's not a 1,000,000-line code base. They cannot keep it in their heads. And they haven't developed the methodology to know to use maybe some more traditional tools to digest it, to see the architecture and then help analyze the architecture. There are missing steps there that they just don't have. And so this is where the vibe coding thing falls down. It's where you reach the limit. I mean, people have done it. People are shipping things they vibe coded and are making money, sometimes a lot of money on them, but there's a cap. And the cap is gradually going up as these things get better. But the cap is the context window on the LLM and how big a thing can it deal with before it starts making stupid decisions. And that's what we see with these things like Claude Code, is they are really good at doing some focused tasks. And if I have a good software developer who understands architecture, he was already probably what we called the 10x engineer. Give him Claude and he's the 100x engineer. And that's how you get teams of 10 people that build businesses that do $100 million in business. But just saying, hey, couldn't the LLM fix my architecture problem? No, it cannot today. We're years away from that.
So I'd argue there a little bit. I don't want to stick on this, but asking Claude Code, and I have asked it to do this, maybe not on a 1,000,000-line code base, but asking it to understand the architecture and then make choices based off of that, I have had success with. But again, maybe on a, 100,000-line project. I have had success saying, hey, this one file is getting too big. Can you break that down into something smaller and make this more manageable? But I get your point for a large enterprise code base. Maybe not there yet. There's other tools you can use that sort of help along that path. But
I want to say what you did here is you literally said, like, hey, I asked Claude for help understanding the code base. Mm-hmm. It can help with that.
Yeah.
Am I going to tell Claude, go refactor that code base? Not unless you want a big pile of trash.
Specifically what I asked.
Second one was, hey, take this small part of the code base and refactor that because I determined that. Yeah, it's really good at that. So you can all see it directionally going there, but when we talk about that being an answer today to people's problems on a large code base without you giving it a bunch of direction, I claim no.
Okay. But back to the original question I was asking a while ago, not so much why do the current LLMs, which are, you're right, they're even ChatGPT is getting better at code generation. Not so much why are they not doing the AppSec thing. Why can't someone else? I mean, this is a huge problem. We've got multiple podcasts on this, and we've got magazines, shows down at Coronado and Disney. We've been spending a lot of money on AppSec for a long time. Why are we not spending money on training a separate LLM to sort of fix all these things which are horrible and broken?
I think that is...
Come on, you're down by the VCs. Let's go get some funding.
Well, no, I mean, I think that is what needs to happen for the good of us all, is we need better trained AIs to do that. I mean, frankly, set security aside, what they're not good at right now is even testing. Like, they're not good at functionality testing. The number of times I've had Claude just lie to me about the tests being well constructed and passing. It's not what they're good at. So we need a set of more special purpose LLMs that have different personalities, truly different personalities. Something like Claude Code is geared to be a code engineer. Giving it a system prompt that says, be an AppSec engineer, doesn't really change the whole training set. It doesn't really change the mindset. So, getting the industry behind the idea that, if somebody like an Anthropic decides it's a competitive differentiator for them, that they can demonstrate it builds more secure code, they will train the thing to build more secure code. But until that happens, people like Anthropic and OpenAI are dealing with hundreds of billions of dollars that they are throwing at this problem, asking, check marks to solve this problem. It's not a level playing field.
Yeah, I think my two go-to jokes on this topic are, here's your prompt, like you're saying, give it to whichever code generator, say, write this, refactor this, comma, but make it secure. Just why don't you just add that to the prompt and it works? And we, of course, are in it's October, Cybersecurity Awareness Month. Why can't we just give all of the PowerPoints we've given to humans, feed them into the LLM, and now it knows what all the right things to do are?
Yeah, but that didn't work for the humans.
It didn't work for the humans. LLMs are not human nor human thinking. But where I was going with that was to bring back to the project, because we're running out of time, unfortunately, is that we started talking quite a bit about how to make the models better, how to make the generators better, in the sense of more secure, for whatever definition of more secure means. But there's still a lot of people that can participate within the OWASP GenAI project. And I think there's still a lot of problems that can arise from secure code that create insecure or unsafe apps, is maybe the better term there, in the sense of, here's an app that securely uses HTTPS. It goes and obtains it can interact with your calendar and interact with your bank, but it can do a lot of unsafe things. So those unsafe areas, how can we humans help participate with the GenAI project to make sure those get identified, those get secured?
So let me just level set here. Everything about writing secure code is still relevant in a universe where we have code, which we are going to have for a very long time. So if you've still got databases, you've still got SQL injection, all of it. I've still got all of that. The real reason the GenAI project is here, for most of what's there, is that all interesting software going forward is artificially intelligent. It's not just that I'm using an LLM to write code. All new interesting projects will use an LLM at runtime, not at build time. All revolutionary software will be AI. And I use all in the 99% case. And I think when you come to accept that, and when we look at the things that people are building massive businesses on, shifting their businesses, these are agentic use cases more and more and more. You need to assume that as an AppSec person, I need to understand those use cases. I need to understand how LLMs work the same way that I needed to understand how Python worked. I need to understand how LLMs work and how MCP works the same way that I needed to understand how SQL worked, and how databases worked. I tell people, like, would you trust the people in your SOC if they didn't know how TCP worked? No, I wouldn't. Like, do I need them to be able to disassemble a packet? No, but I need them to know how a network works. So
Yeah,
you need
and
to
what gets
understand.
interesting there is that it's calling out the skill sets because do they need to know the TCP to address all of the let's pick on SharePoint. That's quite in the news, and you kind of don't. But TCP is helpful for the basics of, do you know some principles behind what spoofing can be? Why is something, what is a fundamental difference between TCP and UDP, just in the sense of reliability or trust
Yep.
in the communication? And in both cases, if everything over the world is HTTPS and SSH, how much you really care about TCP? That's taking away, unless you're like a Cloudflare or Fastly dealing with DDoS. And this is where I'm curious about, do we need to know how to tweak model weights, or do we need to know the principles between, sure,
That-
maybe everything is an agent, but my agent-backed grep that can do something like empty my fridge, I'm just going to say something silly, that's where it gets into, maybe I'm picking up on that excessive agency. That feels like a more interesting area to me.
So I think you draw an important distinction, and it's one that we've always drawn with our project. Is our project is not designed for people building LLMs. Like, if you are building an LLM, you are in a different discipline. That's
Of
like,
course.
I don't think you need to understand how to build a network switch to work in a SOC, but I do think you should understand the difference between, UDP and TCP, and you should understand the difference between HTTP and HTTPS. You don't need to understand how to build an LLM, but you need to understand how it works. And there are things where once you understand how it works, those are big conceptual unlocks that will be key to you understanding how can I and can I not securely use these to do the job that we're trying to do.
And I think
I think more than anything, all of the stuff that we're building in the GenAI project is, let me help you understand the basics. Let me understand the specifics around when you're going to use this to build agents that have tools. Let me help you understand how you're going to red team these things to test the security of them. These are all components of understanding them, which is a completely different discipline than you need if you're going to go work at OpenAI and build the next generation ChatGPT-6. Totally different monster.
And that feels like a great point. And just because so many companies are consuming even just an MCP and figuring out, oh, wait, where was the authentication part of MCP? And now OAuth sort of got, and OICD sort of got tagged on at the end there. So how it works is definitely a great motto. It's also 3 words, but which Steve reminds me, near the end of all of our interviews, we always like to ask our guests to describe AppSec in 3 words. And you have all the context available to you want. So no other constraints than that. So what would be your response?
Understand, don't scan.
I like that. That's definitely, that's quite universal. More than just Gen AI, I have to say. I appreciate that. And for those of you who don't want to scan yet, but want to understand more about the OWASP GenAI project, please visit our show notes. We've got links to that. We've also got links to Steve's book. So I want to say thank you for checking those out, and say thank you once again to Steve for joining us for this great chat.
Oh, guys, thanks for having me. This was a lot of fun.
A lot of fun. Appreciate it. Thanks to John as well. We're going to take a quick break now and return with news of the week. Ransomware, supply chain attacks, 0 days. Cyber threats don't wait, and neither should your defenses. With ThreatLocker, you're not just reacting to threats, you're stopping them before they start. Our Zero Trust endpoint protection locks down your environment with pinpoint control over what's allowed to run and what's not. No guesswork, no blind spots. Just proactive, built-for-now security that keeps your business moving. Want to see how a true default deny strategy works? Head over to securityweekly.com/threatlocker and take the first step towards shutting the door on threats before they even knock. Welcome back to Application Security Weekly. We just talked with Steve Wilson about the OWASP GenAI project, what a future of AppSec and agents could look like, and where we still need so many people, many people, to think about architectures and AppSec. I'm your host, Mike Shima. I'm here with John Kinsella. And John, we've got some news to get through. And in the spirit of having a great conversation with Steve about AI, LLMs, Gen AI, and all the flavors, I do have quite a few articles that are LLM related. The first one is from Curl, and this is Daniel Stenberg's blog. And for those of you who've been following, I've been pulling in a couple of these blog articles, and famously, they've been talking about AI slop or just bug bounty noise that's been coming in that have been obviously LLM generated and just a distraction, low quality, nothing there. They've been made up out of whole cloth or whatever fancy metaphor you'd like to use. But here is a new breed of analyzers where he's talking about some reports that look like they have been a little bit human curated, but obviously generated from an LLM or an LLM plus call it traditional scanner. This is my traditional grep out there that have been producing a lot of reports. Now, I do want to preface this article in saying it's talking about software quality reports, not necessarily just a slew of dozens or even hundreds of exploitable security vulnerabilities. Mm-hmm. But to their point is the curl project very, very much cares about being as pedantic, if you will, about code quality. They very much embrace correctness for across every line of code, across every architecture they're building for, et cetera, et cetera. And to me, it looks like this was LLMs were actually very welcome in the sense of, hey, you missed a comma there, you missed a comma here. Or to be a little bit more concrete, actually looking at your comments in this preamble to this function don't match what the function actually implemented. One of these is wrong. Should you fix the comment or should you fix the function? And it was correct in this case, the LLM suggestion. So this is starting to appeal to me in that sense of not LLM as that security assistant, but as what we were just talking about in the last segment, writing better code for that matter. So what do you see when you see an article like this? Are LLMs coming in and just poking you in helpful but perhaps annoying ways? One more thing.
So I think this tickles the part of me that thinks a lot of the application security issues we have are the result of lazy code. Mm. So it's partially that they're being pedantic, but they're using a library where you can almost say, a language you can almost say you have to be. That's yes. Sort of the thing with C, right? You can shoot yourself in the foot, but do you want to? So if you have something come along and say, hey, that's a foot gun, that I can see the value of it. It's funny in both sort of written word and code. I will be sort of pedantic. I will sort of correct people on some of the small little silly things. So that type of correction to me wouldn't be that bad. What would require me to sort of build up trust over time? Can I trust this thing with the recommendations it's making, or is it noise? Because still you have to go through each one of these, and then that's right. He's being very gracious about it. A lot of other open source projects are like, don't send us that trash. So that's refreshing in a way.
It is, and that near the end you made that important distinction in the sense that I don't think it's unfair to characterize these as these are really compiler warnings. These are things. Let's say they're flaws or they're incorrectness, but they're not leading to the undefined behavior necessarily that C and C++ could be so notorious for. But they're helpful corrections. And I guess for me, if this LLM was giving me this feedback during my commit process, I would find that helpful early on. But what's missing here is I am still curious about Joshua Rogers. He's one of the people giving a lot of this feedback, how much he's also curating these on his own to build that trust that you were just describing. So we almost have John's trust in a human plus an LLM rather than just an LLM, which feels like the state that we're in at the moment.
Well, part of the thing which is really interesting around Joshua's post, and we've talked about this in the past, there's so many different tools out there right now. Like, it's not AI slop, but like everyone is really excited and working on some sort of AI related thing. Not everyone, but it feels like that. And he's gone through a pretty good collection of these things and sort of test them and see what's going on. And for me right now, that type of guidance is gold, just so I don't have to go and test all these things myself. So this is a long blog post, but I have no doubt that this is worth a read, just to sort of understand what the different tools are. Not just what they are, but like not just who's good, who's bad, but the different approaches they're taking. Because I'm guessing that different approach might help in some cases, not others. So it's not like a one-size-fits-all tool, and hopefully this sort of helps people figure out which one fits them best.
Indeed. And there's actually two things I want to highlight through this article before we move on. One was Daniel called out memory leaks no one else reported. And this is actually a memory leak that was in the code for at least a decade, which surprises me because we do live in the world, as I said, compilers with address sanitizers. Valgrind is easy to run with curl. It's not so easy to run with many other systems or many other software projects. But one of the challenges with memory leaks using that compiler or that Valgrind approach, you actually have to go down that code path. What stands out here is the LLM apparently seemed to understand, it didn't need to compile the code, but it could interpret, it could understand that this code is attempting to do this. This code is, basically allocating some memory. And here is an if statement. Here's some path that you leave, and that memory is never freed. And that sounds like a pretty interesting case that isn't an LLM plus, my grep that I like to joke about. So that did catch my eye as something to watch. But something else I wanted to pull you in, John, so that you're not just the poor audience for me to talk this whole segment, is that near the top, he describes curl as almost 180,000 lines of C89 code. And that's 180,000 lines is pretty big, and that's maybe in the ballpark of the context you were just talking about in the previous segment. How much has your experience seen? How much do the lines of code care? Do you care? Does that matter to you right now as you've been playing with LLMs?
It depends on what you're trying to do. If you sit down on one of these things and say, hey, I need a function to, in other words, if we're doing something greenfield, say, I need a function that does A, B, C, D, and like you sort of spec it out, and it's great at that type of thing. As Steve was saying, when you want it to comprehend the overall application, that becomes fairly difficult. Claude's up to a million lines of context now. But even that, that's, 100,000 lines of code. It's only going to work if you got 10 bytes a line. But there is other tools which will go through and index that code base. And then instead of Claude searching it, it'll ask the other tools to say, hey, so there's ways to do it. And the point I was trying to make is it can go through and it can scan it. It doesn't have to keep everything in context to understand the architecture. And then once you have the architecture, it understands, not me, then it can be asked to say, hey, I want to make these type of changes to the architecture. It's basically have to learn how to use the tool, which is sort of what I was saying here with these different tools that are there. Maybe, Claude's, if you look, there's benchmarks out there now for folks who are interested in this around sort of benchmarking the different, we think of the big guys like Claude and DeepSeek and ChatGPT, but there's a ton of other smaller models out there, sometimes bigger. And in some cases, those other models are actually better. They might be more expensive, might be cheaper, but it is really coming down to what's the best for what you're looking to do. So that's the tricky part.
And part of that tricky part is it gives me the segue into a Google DeepMind article. This was introducing CodeMender, an AI agent for code security. And admittedly, apologies up front, this is one of those blog posts. It's a little bit more marketing and high level than giving good meaty technical things that are maybe interesting to talk about for us or for our listeners.
Yeah.
But the reason it grabbed me is the one on the point about lines of code. It says over the past 6 months, they've upstreamed 72 security fixes to open source projects, including some as large as 4.5 million lines of code. Now, it's not clear if it needed to have all that 4.5 million within a single context window to find vulns. So there's a little bit of hand wavy there, but the point still stands that it can be applied to monorepos, to very large projects. I'm taking a breath because the reason it stood out to me is that they call out a couple examples that you can basically just watch the videos for, but those examples appealed to me in the sense of these are things I would care about. On the Daniel side and the curl project side, they were very much just correctness everywhere, correctness anywhere. So really small things that maybe not every single open source project has the time or capacity to deal with. But here they were talking about identifying the root cause of a vuln, successfully do that, creating non-trivial patches, and then there was near the end, this is the one that I smiled at. We'll see what John's reaction is. Proactively rewriting existing code for better security. Now, that isn't exactly refactoring because the example they pull out is applying a very specific annotation to some function calls and to some lines of code. So it's not a full refactor, but it's the type of thing that they point out. This annotation helped with mitigating exploitation. So you might still have your Stack Overflow, your boundary overflow, but it was no longer exploitable. And obviously that's appealing to Google and everyone that Google sees using their software.
Just a quick aside, what caught my attention, I saw this article too, but I just realized on Byline, For Flynn is co-author, so I guess he's over at Google now doing stuff. That's For Flynn of Uber fame and previous other worlds. I think let's go back to the context thing for a tiny second, because I think part of it's possible for an LLM to have a larger context space. If Google's doing this stuff in-house, and I think the big thing both of us were really looking for is to get our hands on this damn thing. It sounds great, but let me use it. Because this is exactly what I started talking about in the first end when we're talking to Steve, is like, why doesn't someone build an LLM to do the appsec side of things? Okay, here we go. Well, let me use it. But the context thing, it comes down to two things. If you're in a multi-tenant commercial LLM, and I got ahead of myself. I want to have the context to scan a 4.5 million line code application or understand it, comprehend it. That thing has to be uploaded to wherever that model is, more likely in the cloud. So besides just the bandwidth, because that's pretty cheap nowadays. But in the cloud, even if you've got 50,000 machines, 100,000 machines with these GPUs, one of them you have to set aside, probably 45 to 100 megabytes of, did I get that right? 45 to 100 megabytes just to analyze this one code base. I think I'm off there. But a significant amount of RAM, right? The way these things, I'm sure a lot of you guys figured it out, the way these things work is when you're figuring out the business model, you've got so many servers, you go try and squeeze so many people on there, you go do so many requests per second or so many inferences per second. Okay, how do you charge for that limited resource that you've got? Because trust me, we can't get these damn things fast enough. So even if we wanted to charge more, we literally can't get them fast enough right now. That's a problem in the industry. So that's part of the reason why they're saying, hey, it's a megabyte context window. So the core point there, bring it back, is, Google can do 4.5 million lines of code on their context internally. For them to give that to us, we either have to pay a lot of money, and I'm already paying Claude too much, or they've got to figure out some really interesting trick to sort of how do you squeeze more stuff into that existing context space.
And one of the things that's been very difficult to talk about, mostly because there's so little transparency around the cost and how should these be properly priced rather than just VC subsidized pricing.
Yeah.
In the sense of, okay, curl got a few dozen reports. How expensive was that to produce? Which I think the outcome of a better curl you'll get me convinced. I like that. I am a fan of correctness. I would definitely fall into that OCD type of approach. But even with the Google, their code mender, they have OSS fuzz. I'd be curious, what is the investment in CPU cycles for running OSS fuzz, what it finds versus the LLMs that you're talking about just now? It would just be, yeah, it is out of curiosity. I don't think that necessarily impacts AppSec directly, but it is definitely gets into the idea of AppSec as a business and where are we prioritizing how we're applying this.
Yeah, and that's there's questions. Well, there's still we'll say there's questions about if we're in a bubble right now or not with this AI thing. If we are and that usage starts to die down, the economics of these, well, the economics of training the models is going to change, but also the economics of using them might change too. So the question is, are you looking for supply versus demand? How does that model change to allow us to do some things we want to do on here? And that's, it's they can't build the data centers fast enough, not alone stock them with things, not alone get power for them. Yeah, it'll be. I think it's going to take a few years to reach some point of decency. But again, when I say decency of usability at the cost we want, but then again, this market is changing. This market and industry is moving so quickly that a few years is such a huge statement. So we'll see.
It is. And you can just look at that. Just look at the LLM top 10 changing in 2 years itself. But there is money out there, and 4.5 million of that money, John, is in a Wiz-sponsored zero-day.cloud. This is basically a bug bounty competition, a CTF-style competition that they'll be running at Black Hat Europe in London this December 10th and 11th. But it's open to everyone, and I wanted to grab it just in that spirit of how do I learn? How do I get some hands-on learning? How do I play around with some environments? Because those are some great ways to learn by hands-on. And the zero-day.cloud is an environment set up with AI, unsurprisingly, Kubernetes, cloud native stuff, containers and virtualization, web servers, which Nginx, Apache Tomcat, Envoy, these seem a little bit old. I don't hear about those as much these days because LLMs have consumed everything. But the point being, there's a lot of infrastructure that you can look at. Most companies are using one, if not two, three, four of those categories of those recognizable names. So seeing a CTF, learning how they could be compromised and playing around with them, looks like it'd be pretty fun. So I don't know. Is this going to occupy you for November? Are you in the lead up to?
I wish I had the time. And I was looking it through this during the week. So one comment on the web server thing, because they have a 50K bounty for Envoy bugs, and it goes up to 300K for Nginx, which is sort of interesting. But one of the core things, getting back on the previous thing, then I'll shut up, around the AI stuff is right now what we're seeing is there's a shift from web scale, which we've talked about for the last decade, 2 decades, to AI scale, which is significantly different how the infrastructure has to be provisioned, programmed, provided. There's probably another P word, but like it's not just, hey, we're throwing the LLM on the internet and like allowing it to go and connect and do things. So there's probably a change in the security model around that too, of what does it mean to secure something at I'll say Gen AI scale versus web scale. But back to this article, or back to this CTF, so zero-day.cloud, folks, in your browsers, fun to browse this for a minute or two, because there's a lot of different categories in here. You mentioned a few, Mike. Olama's got 25K, VLLM, which I hadn't heard of, 25K. But there was some bigger ones. I believe they were the databases that go down through this. Tomcat, 100K. That's surprising. But then, as I said, get into databases. So unauthenticated RCEs for Redis is 100K, Postgres 100K, MariaDB 100K, and then the DevOps folks 40K. I thought I saw one higher, but yeah. So it's a lot of different areas. What's neat about this, I thought, is as you were saying, like, yeah, you've got 2 months to sort of find your bugs and get ready to go visit Europe. Wish I could, but yeah, that ain't got that time, unfortunately.
Ain't got that time. But your other P, as you were alluding to, would be protect Gen AI scale. So there you go. And now that I've I think there's one thing, if you were going to shut up earlier, I hope you won't shut up for this, John, because I think this appeals to you. I pulled in admittedly a fun article. This was from 2 or 3 weeks ago. I forget the time here, but it was the Microsoft Excel superstars are throwing down in Vegas. And this is a annual competition that has been going on for decades, in fact. And is basically how much of a nerd can you be to solve a problem within Excel? And this is just a fun type of programming challenge, kind of in the same vein as something like a code golf, something like that. But I wanted to bring it in because I know our friend over on ESW, Adrian Sanabria, I think you've made this joke too, is that if you have a startup, often your startup's competitor is an Excel spreadsheet. Yes. And it makes me wonder how much of also is your competitor now just some person with an LLM or some person with a spreadsheet, because those could be the two competing elements today. So I was just having fun with that. I'm not sure if you'll be competing with this, since Vegas is a little bit closer than London in December.
Your LLM just has to be better than the other guys. And actually, another thought on that one, it's in a tab around here somewhere. There's a startup right now that's doing a spreadsheet where each cell is an LLM. So I haven't, it sounds like if you can figure out talk about, you got to find the right problem for the tool, but there's got to be something there. I haven't thought about it enough. Folks, you got to pull this up. I've tried to watch this in the past. It's on YouTube, the contest. It gets boring pretty quickly. But the folks at Verge did a pretty amazing job on the layout of this article. It's actually sort of like a spreadsheet. You can click around and like the value shows up at the top, and they've done a good job on this. The one thing I was interested to look for in this article, not file, you've got growing coding and LLM capabilities in Excel. They didn't hint upon that, so I'm guessing those might be blocked or banned right now from the competition. But again, I'm not trying to go back there, but Excel is becoming this, pretty crazy complex thing. So yeah.
Yep. And Microsoft's putting LLMs in everything. It's LLMs in your Excel. It's already there. So John, as a podcaster, speaking of things can get boring to watch pretty quickly, I'm sure that never applies to us, but
of course not.
It definitely doesn't apply to you. So I appreciate you joining us this week for the interview segment and the news once again. Thanks, John.
Oh, it takes both of us, but thank you.
Thanks everyone as well for sticking around to the end and joining us as we talk through both the interview with Steve and the news. If there are areas of news you'd love to see us cover or talk more of, let us know. We'd love to hear what you think. And please remember to subscribe. Check out the show notes. We obviously have links to these articles and a few more over there. And please share us on the socials. And speaking of scary October, check out Stalker 2025 by Gregorio Franco. We'll see you next time on Application Security Weekly.